Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmanOnline.com. I know I say this a lot, I get excited about these episodes, but I can't wait for this discussion on Hiram Abiff, the man, the myth, and the legend. And for this episode, we're bringing in my junior deacon, Brother David Hosson, junior deacon at St. John's Lodge, number 11 here in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast.
It is an honor to be here. I'm very excited. And for all the brethren out there, Brother Arce is kind of among us, a local celebrity just because of many things. But this podcast is really awesome. A lot of us listen, dial into it. And thank you for having me.
Wow, thank you. I would say a lodge celebrity.
Lodge celebrity. Yeah, okay.
We know our audience, which is good. And the cool thing is that this podcast is coming from a co-presentation that David and I did in our lodge here in Washington, D.C. I want to say, was it January or February of this year? Yeah,
something like that.
It was a while back, and the backstory is the master of the lodge assigned us to do a podcast or a program on esotericism and Freemasonry. And so after getting that assignment, I was standing at the bar and I was talking with David, and I said, "What comes to your mind when you hear esotericism or esoteric and Freemasonry?" And you said, "Well, Hiram Abiff," and I said, "Stop right there." That is, I think, one of the most esoteric figures in Freemasonry. Why would you say that first? Why was that the first thing that came to your mind?
I was raised in 2019, and leading up to being raised, after being initiated and passed the same year, reading books and learning a little bit more about Hiram Abiff. Along the way, and kind of listening to actually other podcasts and audiobooks and reading stuff. Like, he just seemed like such an interesting figure. And it seemed like there's so much wrapped up with him as an individual, historical, the kind of traditions wrapped up with him. And like, for me, he just seems kind of veiled in esoteric thought.
And our listener gets to hear me talk about Freemasonry every week, but you get to actually experience it in person every month at our meetings. So you know how I feel about Hiram Abiff, and we had talked about this. And I think a lot of men, if you put the Bible down several years ago, and even if you didn't, he's only mentioned in a few traces, and we'll get into all of that, but it's not even to say he's a bench warmer character in the volume of Sacred Law. He's very obscure. So as you're going through your degree process and you get to that third degree and there's the Hiramic Legend, you're like, who is this guy? Why is he so important in Freemasonry? What does this story have anything to do with everything else that I've been exposed to? There's so many questions that are flowing through your mind that I think a lot of guys just default to the, if they're saying this is the legend and he really existed, then he must be a real person. What were your thoughts after you first experienced the Hiramic Legend? Did you think he was real? Was it a legend? Was he kind of a ghost, a myth?
I kind of equate him to like St. Patrick, where, St. Patrick is, he was this real person, and so much has been written about him and things attributed to him. And I was kind of thinking maybe Hiram Abiff was, kind of like St. Patrick, and being maybe this kind of composite figure of many people kind of wrapped up into this single individual. Maybe that's true. I'd like to think that he was a real person. Reading what you see in the Bible, in Kings and Chronicles, that it's written with such specificity. The references to him are so rich in detail that you can't help but think that, hey, there's got to be some truth to this.
Right. I love that you equate him to like a St. Patrick's legend, because That, I think, is what is kind of presented roughly as a candidate going through the degree. And this is the fun part. So we're going to be examining this from all phases. We'll get into the volume of sacred law and what references exist in the sacred text, the Holy Bible. But there's a special superpower that is Brother de Hosson's background. So what is it that you do that adds this extra layer of research?
Both professionally and academically, I had a background just studying Arabic and Hebrew, and just kind of looked at some of the linkages between this family of languages, the Afro-Asiatic languages, what used to be called the Semitic languages, and just the cultural threads that pervade all of them, the commonalities across all of these languages. I mean, I'm talking like, ancient Canaanite or Phoenician, Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, Amharic. There's just all these things that continue through history. I mean, across millennia. But yeah, just having the opportunity to study some of these languages has kind of helped, and I'd like to think kind of complemented some of my own experiences as a Freemason as well.
And that's what caught my ear is when you said, well, Hiram actually comes from Hiram, which is based in this. And then I'm like, okay, no one's ever gone there before. Because I think most learned or just exploring Freemasons, we've gone through the volume of sacred law or we've searched for Hiram Abiff. And yeah, there's a sprinkling of references about Hiram in the Bible. And you bring that up in our presentation. And if that's really all you walk away from, you're like, okay, Hiram was a pretty good guy. Where did you go in your research that took those meanings way deeper?
Yeah. So for me, the biggest thing, because again, it just in my own curiosity about this individual, I checked out, what was written by him kind of out there in kind of like Masonic related books, what was posted online, checking out the references, the specific references to him in the Holy Bible, kind of looking at even at Kings and Chronicles, even in the original Hebrew, taking that kind of deeper look at some of the things wrapped up with this individual that I thought were just really revealing, and just some of the later writings that kind of build on that foundation, that kind of preserve that same kind of mystique. Like one of the interesting things I thought was the one verse in Second Chronicles chapter 2, verses 11 through 14, Solomon talking about him, he refers to him as Hiram, my father. He says, Hiram Abiff, Hiram, really my father or my master.
Mm.
So that reference, just using that Eb or Ev for father, master for this commoner is very revealing. And then the name of Hiram, and the way he's referenced. So it's either Hiram or Huram Avi or Hiram Aviv, which is his father. So it's that Hiram Aviv, which becomes Hiram Abiff, kind of later on in English and in other languages. But that, his master, when it's talking about Solomon and kind of referencing Solomon in the third person, or Solomon himself saying my master. So that reference right there says, here's a king referring to a commoner as a master, my father, this authority figure. Here we have a king, a great king, putting this commoner above him and recognizing his skill, his authority, the quality of his craftsmanship, his expertise, his excellence, his commitment to excellence. Like, I think for Freemasons, he's a model, outside of the Hiramic legend. It's like, here we have something, we can not, it's not about status or wealth, but, for me, it's like reaching our full potential as men, as individuals, as Freemasons. Like, he's a model there, when he has a king referring to him as a master, as a father figure, really. And that's, really when it comes to Ab, how we can kind of look at that in a translated form. But later on in Second Chronicles, in chapter 2, it's noted that he is skillful in work in gold and silver and brass and iron. This is still the Iron Age. This is 10th century BC. Working with iron is still a new technology. And here's this craftsman working in brass. Everyone in the Middle East is working in brass at this point. And here he's working with this metal, the industry involved with that, with iron working, smelting everything, the resources involved. Here's this individual skilled in that. He's also skilled in working with purple dye, blue dye, the dye of kings. So, and these are the Phoenicians, Tyre and Sidon. This is Phoenicia, the Canaanite people of the Eastern Mediterranean. So he's entrusted to work with these dyes. There's laws that prohibit commoners from wearing these materials, from wearing clothing dyed with these with the shellfish dyes, purple and blue. It's really a royal blue. So that itself, it's like, wow, there's something really special about this guy. He's not just your average Joe, not just some guy, voluntold to work for the king. There's something, and Solomon and King Hiram of Tyre recognizes that there's something special about him. For me, just Chronicles itself and Kings and Chronicles do kind of mirror each other in a lot of ways. Just a little background on Kings and Chronicles. These are books of the Bible that really cover the history of the ancient kingdom of Israel, Judah, the second kingdom of Israel, the Babylonian captivity, and then the triumph of King Cyrus of Persia over the Babylonians. So this is really an exhaustive traditional history of the Jewish people. When you have such a prominent figure then like Solomon putting this commoner up on a pedestal, there's a lot of revealing things going on here.
Hey, listener, it's Brother Michael R.C., co-founder of Craftsman Online and host of our podcast. We are excited to roll out our new Superfan subscription. What's a Superfan? It's you. You get exclusive access to New York State's only 5-star rated weekly Masonic podcast, ad-free, for just $5 a month. But wait, as they say, there's more. Our Superfan subscription includes no ads and early access to weekly episodes, exclusive subscriber episodes with some of our favorite select guests, and invitations to virtual interactive interviews that we'll be doing with select guests where your questions are asked and answered. Sign up now by hitting the link in this announcement to become a superfan and take your listening experience to the next level. I've never heard of anybody really outside of what we're told in ritual about Hiram, which would be the myth or the legend of him. Well, let me take a step back. I think they're trying to outline who the man Hiram Abiff is, but a lot of what they tell us in the build up to the ritual is kind of the myth of who this Hiram Abiff character is. And now you're speaking to the actual legend of. The part of your presentation, besides where we're going to go next, which is where we're going to break down the language of it, but when you hear a king, refer to a commoner as my master, my father. If you're familiar with the Bible, the only time you ever hear a king say that is when they're talking to this great architect of the universe. They never refer to another human being ever as that because the king rules all. So what was it besides, having this average social status, providing an excellent service to the king, being trusted to work with the color purple? What did Hiram Abiff do that you were able to find that allowed him to earn that title?
What's laid out in especially in 1 Kings chapter 7 and then verses 13 through 14, verse 40 and then 46 through 47. It's kind of amazing. I mean, much of this chapter is devoted. I mean, it just does this exhaustive kind of delineation of all the things that Hiram had done in the first temple. Again, he's this widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, who he was filled with wisdom, a worker in brass, cunning to work in all works of this brass. He cast the 2 pillars, 18 cubits high apiece, and it really just goes off into this in-depth description of everything that he did. So that itself is interesting to learn more about the layout of the first temple. But again, it's those references to all those additional things. What I think is also really interesting is that King Hiram of Tyre, and King Solomon, when they refer to each other, they use achi for my brother. So they refer to each other as brother, but then again, they reserve that father, that master term for him. So, they're on one level and he's on a level above them. So even as kings of their kingdoms, of their city-states, they're still recognizing him as something, set apart, that much more special than a king, a worldly ruler. I mean, it's hard to kind of define, but I think in all these things, they're recognizing this kind of something exceedingly special about him, that does put him at a pedestal above them as kings.
Right. And that's the part that really moved me just in this first section, is that we're kind of told in the ritual that Hiram Abiff, the legend of him, he's known for his morality and being virtuous, and that portraying him as we go through that Hiramic legend, we're going to be confronted with some of the challenges that he faced. And to me, when I hear this, I think Hiram Abiff is like my friend Troy, who's a handyman, who when he comes over to fix things around the house, I get out of the way and I refer to him as he is my master. So Hiram Abiff was a master craftsman. He was also amazingly loyal to the kings, and he was a worthy gentleman / subject, I guess, back in those times, which are the two definitions we look at for a master mason, right? We need to be proficient in our craft in Freemasonry, but also we have to be upright men and masons. So then you lay that new meaning on top of everything and I hope brothers that are listening, the next time you observe a third degree, you look at that junior warden station and you perhaps hold that chair or that office or position in a new regard, because here you have two kings in the East and in the West who are looking across to each other, speaking as equals, but they've allowed this everyday, this common man in, who has shown himself to be more valuable and to be on that level of kings, and they look to him as he is going to be the one that takes us in the direction that we need to go, for lack of a better term. I guess the one thing where we got to kind of close the loophole here between the history and the Hiramic legend is, does our Hiram, as we know in the volume of Sacred Law, fall the same way that he does as it's portrayed in our Hiramic legend?
It's hard to make that exact connection between this kind of idealized individual and this individual that we see in the Bible. I think they complement each other, though, because the man that we see referenced in Kings and Chronicles, and then of course he's later on referenced by Josephus in the Judaic Antiquities about 1,000 years later, and almost 1,500 years later in the commentary on the Book of Esther, the Targum Sheni, the second translation, if you will. And they really just kind of build on these references in Kings and Chronicles. Like we never hear him speak, and it's, he's referenced in the third person at all times, and we only hear what he does. He's a doer, a man of action, a man who works with his hands, exceedingly gifted. And then I think in within Masonry, we learn more about the character of the man, and a man dedicated to principles, no matter what, a man with fortitude. So I think they kind of complement each other, just to kind of get back to, how he's referred to in the Old Testament. And it's interesting because, like, his name itself changes within First Kings at least 3 times. We see his name as Hiram, Huram, and then Hiram, and then it's rendered as Huram in Second Chronicles. The same bouncing around, if you will, of spellings applies to King Hiram of Tyre as well. His name is spelled multiple ways, sometimes within the same verse. It's really interesting. We see the root system within Afro-Asiatic languages kind of play out. And these same, there's 3-letter roots, 4-letter roots. that pervade all Semitic languages, Afro-Asiatic languages, and they sometimes get a little modified in different languages depending on the region and dialect and everything. Here we can break down his name to 3 letters, really. Cha-ra-ma. So the Cha, Rosh, Mim. And this is fairly universal across Afro-Asiatic languages, but those roots, that 3-letter root, really tends to mean highborn, exalted, sanctified. In addition to all those references about him, those, as a master, as a father being put on that pedestal, his name itself, and of course he shares it with the king of Tyre, and sometimes that has caused confusion. Hey, are these the same individuals? Looking at Kings and Chronicles in the original Hebrew, you see that 3-letter root that is consistent. I see like the biblical references and the Masonic references really kind of capturing the whole person. Like you really kind of almost need both to know a little bit about possibly this person who lived in real life, and then all of the legends that have arisen around him.
I love that you're leading up to the next place we're going to go with the myth part, is that you'd started out by saying, hey, some of these books in the Bible were written centuries apart by different people at different times. We know that the volume of sacred law has been touched by many hands of man, translations from, different speaking, different traditions. But somehow this Hiram character has been able to be a part of all of it. With so many references, is it your thought that perhaps Hiram could be a compilation of several people during that time, or do you think he was a central figure?
Yeah, my suspicion is that, some of these later references to him could have possibly been that he was this composite figure that, these other individuals were kind of wrapped up into him. Again, kind of like St. Patrick. A lot of things that we think about when it comes to St. Patrick are probably several figures that have been wrapped up into the same person. I suspect that maybe some of that is here. I do find it interesting that a number of years ago, I believe in Byblos, in Lebanon, the ancient city of Byblos, I believe it's Jubail today. I think they found a sarcophagus that is believed to be tied to King Hiram. And my suspicion is that, maybe someday, because there's no inscriptions, there's no archaeological evidence for this individual. I wouldn't be surprised if someday, someone is excavating a site and comes across something that refers to this individual. I mean, that's my suspicion, maybe my hope.
As our ritual states, we're going to leave this question open for future generations to solve.
Indeed.
This has been the Craftsman Online Podcast. I want to thank my guest for coming on this week, Brother David Hosson, the junior deacon of my lodge here in Washington, D.C., St. John's number 11. Brother David, thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you. Thank you, Brother Michael. It was a pleasure and an honor.
If you've enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more, you can tell Siri or Alexa to play the Craftsman Online Podcast. We're available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.